What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel and welcome back to some more of that Pathfinder playtest coverage you all know and love. Today, at the request of Della Purdon, we're going to take a look at the skills of the Pathfinder playtest, and more specifically, I wanted to get into something today that I really didn't have an answer to. I want to know if assurance is worth the feat investment or if it's a trap. Some of my builds have taken it. It seems to be good, but we're going to pick it apart. We're going to look at the numbers a little closer, and we're here to tell you today exactly what assurance assures. If you guys are liking what you're seeing, remember, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. Today, this episode of your Pathfinder playtest content was brought to you in part by Anthony Campanaro. Thanks for your help, my friend. Before we dive in, though, quick announcement. Are you guys watching Doomsday Dawn? If you are, you'll notice that we had a paladin come in for one session and then disappear into the ether, and we also had a barbarian for a while who has done the same. We've lost 2 of our players in Doomsday Dawn, and as such, we're opening it back up once again. We need 2 more bodies to finish out this playtest adventure, guys. If you'd be interested in playing in Doomsday Dawn, comment on this video sometime around the end of this week. Yeah, I know that's not a lot of time, but it is what it is. I'll pick 2 of you at random. We'll throw you in. It's probably the end of this week that our group finishes up in Pale Mountain's Shadow. You guys will come in at the beginning of a fair at Somberfell Hall. Remember, as always, patronage at any tier gets you, in addition to access to a bunch of stuff, an additional entry, and patronage at the highest tier ensures that you are in Doomsday Dawn. But that's enough of that. Assurance. All right, so first things first. For those of us who may have missed it, Assurance is a level 1 skill feat that says choose a skill you're trained in when you first select this feat. You can forego rolling a skill check for your chosen skill to instead receive a result of 10. Don't apply bonuses, penalties, or modifiers. If you are an expert in that skill, you get a 15, Masters get a 20, Legendary gets you a 30. You can take Assurance multiple times. Of course, every time you pick a different skill. Farmhand gets you Assurance with Athletics. Scholar gets you Assurance with Arcana, Nature, Occultism, or Religion. Nomads get Assurance with Survival. On paper, that seems pretty good. It kind of feels, especially when I first saw it, when it was revealed in the playtest blogs, just a little bit like taking 10, taking 20, etc., etc. I myself have never played a character who has Assurance, and I've never tested it out. So really, the only thing we can do is break the math down right here, right? Okay, so here we go. We're going to take 2 characters for the purpose of this experiment. Their ancestries, backgrounds, classes don't matter. The only things that matter are that one of them has 18 strength, one of them has 10 strength at the beginning. At second level, they both choose Assurance with Athletics as their skill feat, and they are both trained in athletics. So let's start with the big guy. Our fighter, barbarian, ranger, etc. Trained in a skill means that when you roll that d20, before you add a modifier, you add your level to the result of the roll. So at level 2, our 18 strength character, or 4 modifier, plus 2 for his proficiency, means that that take 10 on Assurance might as well mean that the fighter took a 4. Right, because 4 plus 6 is 10, we see. At Expert, which is level plus 1, getting a 15 with Assurance, it's like taking 7. 7 plus 4 from his strength, plus 4 from proficiency, is 15. Moving on to Master, which is level plus 2, and I guess I should say we're also assuming that these guys bump up their skills, Expert, Master, Legendary, just as soon as they can. At 7th, plus 2 is 9. Plus 4 from his strength. At this point, he's level 7. He's invested 1 point into his strength with ability score increases, but a 19, of course, does not change the modifier. So the Master is essentially taking 7 to assure that he reaches a 20, and at Legendary, at level 15, plus 3, and now finally, after getting a couple more ability score boosts, that 20 strength is, again, you're taking 7 and receiving a result of 30. So for the guy with big muscles on his muscles, Assurance seems to be selling him short by quite a bit. Johnny No Muscles, who has 10 strength and took Assurance because he was afraid of, like, the quicksand in the second part of Doomsday Dawn. I guess that's a bit of a spoiler, but it's real bad if you don't have athletics. So at level 2, he's trained. He adds 2 plus nothing. Assurance treats it as if he's taking 8. Expert, 4 plus 0. means he's taking 11 to get a 15. At Master, 9 plus 0, again, like taking 11 to get to 20. And at Legendary, 18 plus 0 means to get a 30. He's essentially taking a 12. This seems to obviously favor the character, as I kind of imagined, with less strength. However, both characters are kind of selling themselves a little short. A little less so for the 10 strength guy at Trained, but 18 strength, taking Athletic Assurance and using it sells you really, really, really short because you're probably going to roll higher than a 4. To be honest, the guy with no muscles is probably rolling better than an 8 as well. Obviously, the guy with big strength is going to roll more than a 7 a lot of the time, but it stays about average for the 10 strength character. The Legendary Athletics 10 strength guy is taking a 12, so 40% of the time, he's going to roll better than this. So one has to ask oneself, what is Assurance for? The first thing that comes to my mind is not necessarily that it makes you fumble-proof, because if the DC is set at 20 and you have Assurance and you're trained and you're like, I'm going to take a 10, well, okay, you just fumbled to death, right? But what I will say is it does stop a critical fumble of a natural 1. Not every skill in the book has a critical failure effect. At my tables they do, because I think it's a fun way to play with the narrative. Yes, that's now like 50% of a house rule, but it's still the way my tables run, and it's one of the most contentious things in all of tabletopping. So honestly, that's the big shining beacon in my mind, is it will stop you from rolling a 1. So if you get some kind of roll twice and take the lower effect, or if you're debuffed into the ground somehow, it's alright. Other than that though, I really feel like most of the time, you're going to be rolling better than probably a 12, certainly a 7, unless the Force was just not with you that day. RNGesus is a fickle god, as some of us know. So my first thought is really, it kind of feels maybe not completely like a trap, but not as good as it could. Now, when we flip through the skills section of the playtest rulebook, we see that some things target reflex DC, some things target an athletics DC, a perception DC, but a lot of stuff in this book does say that the GM determines the DC. So that 10 in Assurance at level 2 trained isn't bad? Maybe, depending on what your GM sets the DC as. Back in the day, in Pathfinder 1st edition, the DC to climb a knotted rope was 5. So that's pretty relevant for Johnny No Muscles, again, who has Assurance in Athletics and needs to make sure he doesn't roll a 1 or a 2, because that 10% of not meeting the DC and plummeting to your death, relevant, right? There are, however, a couple exceptions that I'm seeing right now. First and foremost, it's medicine. Administering first aid allows you to stabilize a creature or to revive the creature. That DC is 15, so get Assurance in medicine and get to expert proficiency, which just takes you to level 3, and you can never choke on that, which is relevant because the crit failure has something's dying condition increase by 1 or take more persistent bleed damage, so like that literally could kill the player, but with Assurance, you're good. Now there's one more exception. That exception comes to us in the form of Arcana, Nature, Occultism, and Religion to learn a spell. We talked about this a little. We didn't go into crazy detail in our rogue optimization video, building that arcane trickster, but it's pretty easy. As long as you can cast those spells in the first place, that is in fact how you get your hands on extra spells. So for example, under Religion, to learn a divine spell, you must be a divine spellcaster, and you need to know someone who knows the spell or have access to magical writings, yada yada. And then you spend an hour per level of the spell, during which you must remain in conversation or have that writing in your possession, have an amount of materials, then attempt a religion check, and it does say with a DC determined by the GM, but there's also a table. It's the same DC to identify a spell, but we can see here that legendary proficiency in Religion grants us that first or cantrip spell all the way up to level 6 as an automatic success. And we can also see here once again that the 10th level spell, the DC 40 spell, if we've maxed out our wisdom, again, legendary proficiency says 30 is taking a 7, it's certainly considerably harder to grab, making that a 17, but it's a 10th level spell. We expect that. That level 7 spell is literally just taking an 8. All we have to do, roll an 8, we've got it. And it doesn't go up that much from there. But this is super good for, again, that arcane trickster who's got a lot of skill feats, and say he went into cleric, or wizard, or druid, once we have access to that archetype. I'm hoping it's soon, or bard, to say nothing of the druids and bards that can just reach out and grab this once you get to high level play, and even before then. The master can take 20, the master can get first, second, thirds without a chance of failure with assurance. And we can see, since we've looked at the math, it's not that much harder to roll above it, though of course fumble happens. Now, a lot of things, like we said, will be targeting reflex DCs, athletics DCs, perception DCs. Think like athletics checks to trip, stealth checks to stealth, what else? Things of that nature. We're not necessarily cracking open the playtest bestiary today to determine what works and what doesn't. We can assume that story is a little more along the lines, again, of like how Scared to Death worked in our cleric video. Mooks will fall, things on par with you will not. But the final thing we'll note today is, in the game mastering section of the playtest rulebook, we have this little table right here. And as I understand it, this table indicates what a GM should set difficulties of hazards and traps and the ability to navigate through certain kinds of wildernesses, etc. by. This table here shows us stuff for survival, society, athletics, and acrobatics, and what the level of things might be, what the adjustments for difficulty might be. But the rulebook does say that you can use these as benchmarks. With that in mind, at level 2, when we take assurance with a thing and we have that 10, we can't even beat a trivial task. We're right there. We can't quite grab it. Going to expert, it gets a little better though, because we can beat a level 3 task by taking 15, of course. We'll beat that trivial level 7 with a 20, and a 24 is certainly beaten by a 30, and basically everything under it, but the high-end severe stuff is still stuff we choke on according to this table. So my final thought about assurance is that really it's too vague to be considered a trap, given that these are the DCs and their benchmarks, and the DCs of the playtest are in fact judgment calls. Certain GMs might be really impressed that you have a 15 with assurance on your athletics checks and they might let it go. But another example of this, and this is a spoiler, I'm about to spoil the second part of Doomsday Dawn like a week early. There's some quicksand in Doomsday Dawn that came very, very close to killing my rogue. So close, in fact, that he literally just barely survived it, and it was so daunting that I decided to let the players level in the playtest, because that's how hard it was for them to get past this stuff. There was even an encounter there. They had to fight an Encrave. The Encrave didn't really pose a threat to the druid, who turned into a bear and eated it, but that's a different story. The real threat here, in fact, was the quicksand. It was a DC 18 athletics check to swim up. So by level 4, someone could have assurance with athletics, and assurance at expert says that you're getting a 15, which just barely doesn't pass. So a part of me does think that assurance needs to come up just a hair. Perhaps something along the lines of, if you're trained, you automatically get a 15, expert gets a 20, Master gets a 25, Legendary remains at 30, for reasons like this. But again, in a world where the GM sets the DC, it's too vague to call. If, as we move from playtest to 2nd edition, things get a little more definitive, like they were in 1st edition, for example, climbing a knotted rope was DC 5, or getting a hunch with sense motive was DC, I believe, 20, then okay, sure. These numbers seem okay, and that 10 might get us a little farther, but what do you guys think? How has assurance worked for you guys so far? Should we raise these numbers a little bit in Pathfinder 2nd edition? Let me know, throw it in the comments. As always, conversation will keep rolling. And as always, thank you guys so much for tuning in. Again, be sure to like and subscribe. The next episode of your Pathfinder playtest content, where we're optimizing a barbarian to survive the fatigue round, drops this Saturday.